Hello and welcome to the programme. I'm Takunba Salako. More than 70 million people have been forcibly displaced around the world because of war, conflict and persecution, according to a new report by the UN Refugee Agency. The findings suggest that more people are displaced globally than currently live in all of France. Asylum seekers account for nearly 30 million of those fleeing. Half of them are children, many being unaccompanied minors. They're often stuck for years in refugee camps in host countries which are unable to absorb the high numbers of incoming people. Well, Adrian Edwards from the United Nations Refugee Agency says the number of displaced people continues to rise.
Well, I think people have to look at the big picture of what's going on here. You have 2 decades now of rising numbers of people forcibly displaced by persecution, by war, by conflict. That's an entrenched trend. It's not entirely new this century. In fact, almost every of the last few years we have been announcing at UNHCR, the UN Refugee Agency, we've been announcing higher and higher numbers. At the same time, what's going on is that countries are slowly coming together. They are coming together to a large degree, but it's slow, the rate at which countries are coming together to be able to properly address this.
Well, globally, we're living in one of the longest ever periods of peace. But your report says that if there's a crisis, it's in this capacity of the world to solve, it's incapacity, rather, of the world to solve the conflict. How do governments address that?
Well, it's absolutely correct what you say. Nobody pays the price, if you like, of conflict, of persecution and violence more than these people, refugees and others who flee wars. And unfortunately, the large number of displaced people is a barometer of the state of the conflicted world we're in. We most definitely need much more effort into achieving peace, into trying to keep peace where it is. If you look at how long people stay as refugees, the figures are really quite shocking. 4 out of 5 refugees remain refugees for at least 5 years. 1 out of 5 remains a refugee for 20 years or more. You have situations like Afghanistan, almost 40 years of conflict. Somalia has gone on for decades. We're simply not resolving these conflicts quick enough.
What's your message to people who say, they don't want more funds and resources directed at refugees and, help should first be given to people at home?
Well, as humanity, we have for thousands of years had traditions of giving safe refuge, safe haven to people fleeing war and conflict. And I don't think that's a tradition that's about to disappear. Nonetheless, with displacement on this scale, it's quite clear that no country working alone can deal with this. This does require countries working together. It does require coherence and unity in the international system. And that coherence needs to come together faster than it is at present.
Let's move away from this and look at sort of internal conflicts. The United Nations is warning now that more than 300,000 people have been displaced because of internal conflicts, such as the one going on currently in the Democratic Republic of Congo. How do you sort of address the issue of health being a concern here, and the moving of people around across borders?
Internal displacement is a particularly difficult issue to deal with because often you're working with people who are effectively refugees within their own country. You're dealing with people in conflict areas. Syria is an example of that. DR Congo, as you just mentioned, is an example of that. We've seen big displacement in eastern DR Congo just in the last couple of weeks. And sadly, because of the fighting, because of the conflict, humanitarians can't get there to help. So people are in incredible difficulty there. Of course, if you don't solve internal displacement, you tend to see people becoming refugees by crossing borders too. So it's incredibly important we address these things at their roots and at the source.
Okay. Well, of course, that internal conflict is being aggravated by the Ebola crisis, which is affecting the Democratic Republic of Congo. So whilst you're putting out this message, how do you also combine the fact of, bringing in measures such as greater education as well as fighting, the health threat?
Well, that's where I think there has been some positive news in recent years. There has been recognition that we can no longer deal with refugee situations, view them as short-term humanitarian crises. These are situations which need investment of development. They need investment in services, in schooling, in education, in allowing people to work and making situations sustainable. And there has been movement towards that. There's a new global compact on refugees which was unveiled at the General Assembly last December. There's going to be a new, a first, if you like, world meeting on refugees this coming December, which will see more of those ideas and the concrete measures to address this coming through. But these are still early days. A lot of work has to be done to, as I said, bring about a more coherent approach internationally so that we're up to the measure of this problem.